Wallabies depth chart for 2021. It was a bit of a mixed season for the old Wallabies. Couldn't beat the All Blacks. Came second in the Rugby Championship when they got to play the majority of games at home. Went on a pretty good winning run. Did the double over the Box. Beat the Pumas. And ended the year kind of in a bit of a disappointing way. That series over the French went their way, but it was kind of a less than full strength French side. So how did we go with the Wallabies depth? Now, I've done a few of these videos now. All Blacks, South Africa, France, England. So if you want to see kind of how we worked it with those, check out the other videos. But this one's about the Wallabies. Who did Dave Rennie select? In which position? How did he divide up the minutes between each of the players? What's kind of their starting 15 looked like across 2021? Who's on the outer? Who seems to be kind of maybe potentially as a bit of a bolter for the squad in 2022. But we'll go through the squad and you guys can let me know your thoughts. We will start with the front row, where I think it looks pretty steady, but he's used a fair few hookers. I mean, loose head, clearly James Slipper there in green is your main man for the Wallabies. He's played more than half the minutes. And then Angus Bell's there in blue. He's the second guy. It's pretty much those guys at 1 and 2. No one else has really got a look in. And speaking of guys on the outer, Scotty Seo is there in yellow. He's not favoured by Dave Rennie at the moment. Tom Robertson's there with a tiny little pinch of time. But yeah, for the most part, it's Slipper and Bell. Those are the guys that Dave Rennie has used in 2021. Getting ahead of myself. But, maybe you could play a third guy. I do feel like you need a third guy. Tight head looks a little bit better. What can we say? Tight head is Tupou there in green, Ala Alatoa there in blue, and both those guys have had pretty much the same amount of time. And then Slipper has jumped across there, who plays in yellow. And I kind of like that Slipper, although he's not like a real dominant tight head, he can still play both sides. It's just such a beneficial thing, especially if you're looking at a World Cup. Look at Trevor Nyakane for the Springboks. Look at Andrew Porter for Ireland. Very good whichever side of the scrum they play. It's a pretty valuable skill to have. So maybe even Slipper to get a little bit more time at tight head to build the depth, because you got Greg Holmes, Tom Robertson, and Ollie Hoskins there. Otherwise, so outside of Tupou and Alatoa, it does look a little bit thin, and likewise outside of Bell and Slipper, it looks a little bit thin, but solid enough, you could say. Hooker is a bit more of a mixed bag, with Folau Fainga kind of getting back to be the first choice guy by the end of the year, around about half of the minutes throughout the season there in green. And then Brendan Payengamosa, who's now over in France for a little while, is there in blue. The rest of the guys who've lived on between 5 and 2% of the minutes is Latu green, Kaitu'u purple, Lonergan, that's Lockie Lonergan, red, Jordan Uelese, brownie colour, and then McInerney there in white. So they've got heaps of guys, but you'd kind of like that third guy to maybe have had all the combined minutes, right? Nice 1, 2, 3. But I guess you've got to get a look at them. Some guys have been injured. Uelese is a wee bit injury prone, to be fair. Kaitu'u, I think, looked good when he got some game time. Tolu Latu got some time. He's playing over in Europe. So Dave did choose a few of the European guys towards the end of the tour. But in terms of pure depth, like amount of guys that got turns, it was Hooker that got the most. But I do feel like all three positions don't really have a clear third guy based on the amount of minutes that we have seen allocated. You got your 1, you got your 2, and then other. So, yeah, that's how the front row looks for the Wallabies. Locks, it's a little bit more clear. Both of them kind of look similar in terms of the amount of guys we've seen play. Rodder there at 4 in green, and Matt Phillip there in green for 5. So those are the two main guys who've gotten game time, but then they have shuffled down things around a little bit. Like Darcy Swain's gotten some decent time there in blue for number 4, and Lukan Salakai-Loto there in blue for 5, although he's seemingly fallen a little bit out of favour since taking a bit of time off. I think his missus had a baby, so he took a bit of time off. A lot of players did that in 2021, and you do risk someone kind of taking your spot, and that seemed to happen towards the tail end of the year for him. Rodder can swap sides. He's there in yellow for number 5 as well. We also seen like the likes of Rory Arnold there in purple for number 4. And then Will Skelton there in red for number 5. So you've seen a few guys kind of swap sides. The main guys in terms of pure time, it's Rodder, it's Phillip, Salakaia Swain, and then towards the tail of the air, Rory Arnold, as I mentioned, and Will Skelton got some game time. But yeah, there's a lot of guys. And there's other guys they didn't use as well. Like Nick Frost didn't get any time. There was also, I think Simmons was getting game time last year. He's obviously out the fold, but they do seem to have plenty of locks. Are any of those guys like absolutely world-class locks? I'm not sure Skelton kind of lived up to the hype when he came off the bench for a couple of games. I don't know. I think it's solid without being spectacular in the locking department. I think South Africa's kind of got the best locks at the moment, but there's plenty of good locks around, and pleasingly, seemingly a fair bit of depth in the second row in Australia, which is good. Back row is another area where traditionally the Wallabies have got a ton of depth, and I think that kind of proves to be true here as well. 6 is the only one that looks a little bit messy because you got Rob Valtini there in green. He's the leading guy, but only had about a third of the time. And then Lockie Swinton is there in blue with about a quarter of the time. Likewise, Rob Leota about a quarter of the time. Leota kind of got time towards the end of the season on that Northern tour. He got a fair few minutes on the blind side. Other guys, you've had Pete Samu there. Michael Hooper's packed down on the blind side a couple of times. Obviously not at the start of the game, but maybe towards the end when there's been like a yellow card or there's been injuries or whatnot. So I wouldn't kind of read too much in that. Sean McMahon and even Lukan Salakaia is there as well. So kind of minimal minutes, like McMahon's there in brown. Like there wasn't much impact despite him kind of coming over from Japan to play. It's basically Valtini, Swinton, and Leota. Those are your 3 guys. And I guess in terms of time, at least all of them got a fair crack. That has to be said. But that being said, Valtini, remember he's green on 6. He's also green on number 8, and he played more than half time. So he played a ton of time this year. Clearly one of Dave Rennie's more valuable players this year in terms of where he rates him. Because if you put that 6 and that 8 together, that's maybe even more time than Michael Hooper played. I don't know, it's a lot. He played a lot of minutes, Rob Valtini, this year. Sometimes like he's had an injury kind of affected first few years of his career. He does seem to be getting a good run at the moment, which is clear to see by the amount of minutes he's played. But I don't know, like he's been good again. Like, and he has some cracking games, but I still wouldn't call him spectacular quite yet. Still heaps of potential, and he'll get better. But sometimes I wish he'd realise that he's a big dude. Patrick Tuipulotu from the All Blacks had that once. It took him a while to realise I am a big man, and I can make other people's lives miserable. So he needs to do a bit of that. But maybe back of his mind, a little bit of caution with the injuries there. I don't know. Maybe I'm just talking nonsense. But there you go. Harry Wilson's there in blue. He's had some time, but not towards the end of the year. Isi Naisarani is there in yellow. He's probably one of the guys on the outer. Pete Samu is there in purple. And then Rob Leota, I think, packed down a little bit towards the end when there was a red card. He had to kind of switch number 8. But, decent. I think number 8 looks kind of nice. Maybe if you give Wilson a few more minutes and then take a few off Valtini, it looks kind of a nice balance. Number 7, there's really no debate about that. You can kind of look at that. Michael Hooper is there with so much of that time. That's like 85% of the minutes at number 7 has been played by Michael Hooper. He's had a fantastic year. He is, he's just going to be the number 7. Unless he's injured, he's going to play 7. That's just goes without saying. Interestingly, though, the second guy at 7 is actually Pete Samu, who's played more time at 7 than he has at 8. And he's traditionally number 8. I think he's played more time at 6 and 7 than he has at 8. So it's a bit of a weird one. You got Fraser McCrate there, who's there in purple, who's the only other kind of recognised open side that they've really given a crack to. There's a fair few guys who play 7 in Australia, but with Hoops there, he kind of just hogs the minutes. That kind of is what your captain has to do. That's a pretty common trend across a lot of teams. Like Khaleesi played the lion's share of the minutes for the Box, just generally, unless they were being rotated out. Like the French kind of didn't send all their players on the tour to Australia, like I mentioned. The majority of the captains just play all the minutes. So that's just a thing. So, there you go. That's the Aussie forward pack. I do think it's a decent balance between building depth and keeping some consistency. Clearly, Rob Valtini is one of Rennie's favourites. Like I mentioned, Hooper is pretty locked in. The locks, interestingly, I don't think are locked in. Maybe Isaac Rodder seems to be towards the end of the season one of the kind of preferred options as well. The props, clearly it's Tupou, it's Alatoa, it's Bell, and it's Slipper. But who the other guys kind of remains to be seen. Who's the third choice hooker? He's got lots to choose from, but maybe he needs to pick one and give that guy more time. Yeah, since Stephen Moore retired, it's been a bit of a musical chairs thing, the old hooker position for the Wallabies, but maybe Fainga has kind of stepped up and made that his own in 2021. We'll have to wait and see for 2022. Into the backs, 9, I quite like 9. Look at that, that's tidy. First choice, second choice, third choice. I think that's kind of what a depth chart should look like, especially if you're looking like at a World Cup, right? Maybe a fourth guy, but it's kind of nice that it's 1, 2, 3. It's Nick White in green, it's Tate McDermott in blue, and then it's Jake Gordon in yellow. First choice, second choice, third choice. Nick White and Tate McDermott, obviously quite different players as well, so it's kind of good that Dave Rennie's got both those weapons in his arsenal that he can kind of pick one depending on how he thinks the game's going to go. And then Gordon's had more than token minutes there as the third choice guy. Does there need to be a fourth choice guy? I don't know how deep you go with one position. I think 3 is pretty decent. But you've seen World Cups where All Blacks had to go to their fourth choice 10, so things can happen, but there you go. 10 is pretty similar. You got Noah Lolesio is actually there in green. Quade Cooper's there in blue, and then James O'Connor's there in yellow. So that's kind of interesting in that it seems like towards the tail end of the year anyway, Noah Lolesio is actually the least preferred of the 3, even if he's had the most game time. But Dave Rennie has also said that he's kind of mindful of not overplaying him because he's still a young man and still kind of learning his craft. Coops looked pretty good when he was back, and he would have had more minutes if they'd kind of been able to agree with his club about him going on that Northern Tour and missing the Japanese preseason, but that didn't happen. So, yeah, he would have had more. I think he probably would have outdone Lolesio, maybe. I don't know. Maybe they would have gone with Jock. But Reece Hodge is there in purple, so he is that kind of fourth choice guy. But Reece Hodge pops up in multiple positions because he's just that kind of versatile guy. Perfect for a World Cup squad as well, but there's no one real position. And remember, Hodge had injury too, where Hodge gets any kind of real decent chunk of the minutes. But anyway, into the midfield, you got Paisami is there in green for number 12, and then Karevi is there in blue. So Paisami's actually played more minutes than Karevi, but it's the same deal with Quade Cooper. I think if Karevi gets the go-ahead from his club to go to Europe at the end of the season, he probably has more than Paisami. Tamua is there in yellow. I'm not sure if that experiment continues, but another guy who kind of was injured. So it's obviously very different if you play Karevi compared to Tamua at 12. You're obviously going for a very different style of game with Karevi, very direct, able to create offloads and whatnot for other guys around him, whereas Tamua is essentially that second pure playmaker. Paisami, he's grown on me a wee bit. Like the first couple of games Karevi didn't play, I thought the Wallabies looked a bit lacking, but I still think he adds a bit of value. So I think you can be pretty happy with that midfield. Other guys you've had very, very token minutes at the top. Izzy Parise, Reece Hodge, and then even Michael Hooper once. That's just, I can't remember what game it was, but he had to stand where he had to stand to cover a position for a very brief time, so kind of take that with a grain of salt. 13 is actually pretty dominant, man. Len Ikitau. He's there in green, so he's played like 3/4 of the minutes all year, and then you got Hunter Paisami, who, if you combine his minutes with his 12 jersey, is also clearly kind of one of Dave Rennie's preferred options. Other guys you've had, Reece Hodge, Pataya, and even Callaway for very, very token time. Again, it's end of game. It's when guys are off injured or there's cards or something, and they've kind of had to start, or maybe it was starts, but either way, it's very token time. It's all about Ikitau, basically. Still think he looks best when he's playing alongside Karevi, but if him and Paisami keep playing together, that relationship will only build. So, yeah. Outside backs, It's nice looking. I think there's enough depth and rotation to be kind of happy with the balance. Marika Korobidi about half the time, pretty happy there on the left wing. I think he would have had more in 2020. What do you say? He would have had I don't know, maybe 70%. I haven't kind of run those numbers. And then you got Andrew Callaway there in blue for 11. Tom Wright there in yellow. Wright's actually had more than Callaway on the left wing. I forgot to switch those numbers around. Dalgunu's there as well. But he's another guy who kind of didn't get much until the end of the season. Was he injured out the whole season? I feel like a lot of the Wallabies guys were. Right wing, it's been all about Andrew Callaway. He gets about half the time. He's there in green. Geordie Pataya maybe shifted a wee bit from the midfield into the outside backs this year. He gets about a quarter of the time. And then Tom Wright. So I kind of like that. And then even Reece Hodge there in purple. That's another one that I feel like kind of looks nice, right, in terms of first guy, second guy, third guy. They're all getting enough time to build a bit of consistency, but also a bit of depth. And then fullback Tom Banks about half the time. He also got injured. I feel like a broken record saying got injured. Curtly Beale, Andrew Callaway, but once again I forgot to switch the numbers around. Hodge there in purple was actually the second guy for the Wallabies in terms of minutes at fullback. So it's been a bit of a mixed bag. Hodge got injured, Banks got injured. Cooper was unavailable, Karevi was unavailable. It was a bit disrupted. Like if you're looking across the whole team, the guys who stand out, Michael Hooper, dominant at 7. Lenny Kitau, dominant at 13. James Slipper, dominant at loose head. These guys have all had more than half the time. And then, like I said, Rob Valtini, if you put his numbers from 6 and 8 together, it's massive minutes from him. And even Paisami there, 12 in green and blue for 13. A fair chunk of the time from him as well. So, yeah, I do think it looks healthy. I'm pretty happy. I don't know if we'll see the same kind of experimentation with the overseas guys that was attributed partly with all the COVID stuff happening, players not being available. Sometimes it was kind of state-by-state lockdown stuff meant that Dave was kind of hamstrung by who he could choose. But I don't know that they'll have the same leeway to kind of pick the overseas guys as much as they did in 2021. The likes of, Arnold and Skelton and, Tolu Latu and Curtly Beale, all these guys. I think they are going to focus more on the guys who are based domestically. That's kind of what they say. Most picked 15 from the Wallabies this year. Slipper, Fainga and Tupou is the front row. I think that won't surprise anyone really. Rodder and Phillip in the second row, but obviously Phillip didn't really play much towards the tail end of the year. Interestingly, in the back row, it's Valtini, Hooper, and Valtini. If you wanted to kind of use one of the other guys who played, it'd be, at 6, it'd be Swinton, Hooper, and Valtini. As I said, different players. Swinton's got a bit of that mongrel, whereas Valtini's supposed to be your big blockbusting ball carrier. And as I said, when he does it, he's good. Other times, not so much. White and Lolosio is the 19 combo, but it's another one where you would say at the moment Lolosio is still the development guy, and they'd probably prefer to see someone else play. He was stepping in a wee bit when James O'Connor wasn't available. Paisami and Ikitau is the midfield, so ideally you got Karevi there if he's available, but again, same thing with the overseas guys. Korombete, Callaway, and Banks. I actually think it's a pretty tidy back three, although Banks maybe didn't have a kind of stellar 2021. I know Rennie really likes him, but there's been a kind of few outstanding fullbacks this year, and I wouldn't have said Tom Banks was up there. I do rate him. I've seen him tear teams to bits, but I'm just not sure 2021 was his best year personally. I make it that they used about, I think it was 50 players, which is, I think, more than the likes of, I think, New Zealand and South Africa, but not much. It's pretty similar. I think less than the teams who had the kind of British and Irish Lions tours going, like the likes of Ireland and England. But that first 15 that I read out, they played about half the time. So 51% of all the minutes played were played by Slipper, Fainga, Tupou, Rodder, Phillip, the guys that I read out. So 15 guys, well, it's actually 14 because 2 of them are Valtini, had 51% of the time. So the rest, those other 30, 35 guys, 36 guys, had to share out 49%, so almost half the minutes. So kind of in the middle of the road. Like South Africa was around 60 something. They're more focused on keeping the lineup consistent and giving the starting guys a lot of game time together. Other teams like France were lower. France was like 47 or something. So France rotated a bit more than Australia did. So kind of middle of the road. We did see a few guys seemingly kind of slip to the outer. Like I mentioned, Scotty Seo seems to be kind of not favoured. Liam Wright spent much of the year injured but couldn't really get into the squad. Fraser McRae, as I said, got bugger all time, even though he is another kind of genuine open side with Hooper there. He doesn't seem to really get a spot. Jack Maddox has been in the Wallabies squad before, but not in 2021. Ned Hannigan, I think, is going to be back for 2022, so could he challenge? Hope not. Maybe I've been too hard on him. As I said, Rob Simmons was there last year, but not this year now that he's based abroad as well. Dane Hallett-Petty retired, so we're not going to see him challenge for that fullback jersey. But, I mean, there's a bunch of guys who could be potentials, right? Like Vunivalu, for the outside backs, they want him to play, but he's been injured kind of at key times when he's suspended, I think, once, when he's kind of been right on the periphery, so we haven't seen him in Wallaby Gold yet. I mentioned Nick Frost in the second row. Fergus Lee Warner is one I would love to see get a crack, but doesn't seem to be on the radar at the moment. Pone Fa'amusili, in terms of props, he is definitely on their radar. Maybe he is that next, like I mentioned, there's not really that third guy. Maybe he is that third guy in terms of having another tight head, but he's another one who missed out at the wrong times just with injuries. I'm thinking, like, where is Harry Johnson-Holmes? He has to be on the radar at some point soon as well, because he's still very young. I think he's only got one cap, but he's the one I think, if they develop him, could do a really good job. Outside backs, Josh Fluke and Jock Campbell, Mark Nawani-Tawase, Byron Ralston. There's heaps of outside backs that could get a crack, but I think Vunivalu is probably the most likely. Ire Simone seems to be on the outer at the moment. Kyle Godwin, I think, was called in once but didn't get any game time. So, yeah, there's certainly a fair bit of depth. Will Harrison, I guess, is another one for the 10 jersey, but they seem to be focusing all their efforts on developing Lolosio when time allows. But you've got the experienced hands of Cooper and James O'Connor too. So, it's an interesting one with the Australians. We'll see how things go. Goodness me, 22 minutes, better wrap it up. We'll see how things go with the Super Rugby competition, which is starting in kind of mid-late February next year, how well the Aussie team's going to go. And then once we see the Wallabies back in action, which is still a wee way away, if they are indeed going to focus on playing the guys who are based domestically, I think that's kind of the message that Rugby Australia was sending. But if you can pick a few of the overseas guys, I think Karevi certainly adds his weight in gold when he's available. And then Quade Cooper did a wee job as well. But if I had to pick one, it would certainly be Karevi for mine, ahead of Arnold, ahead of Skelton, ahead of Latu, any of the overseas guys. I think Karevi's your main guy who's going to add some value. But there you go. That's your depth chart for the Wallabies for 2021. You guys let me know what you reckon. Who else have I missed? Other kind of potential guys who could be coming through. Any other guys who you think may be on the outer? Do they need to play a fourth halfback, or do you think dividing the time between those three guys is healthy enough? Who's the next kind of guy who's going to play loose head if CO is not going to be the third guy? You guys have any thoughts? And I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.